Do Hindus understand their sacred symbols? I am a student of Hindu art, aesthetics, and architecture. And once, while I was writing on Hindu temple, somebody asked me a question. I was discussing Hindu iconography, Hindu sculpture, and they asked me a very pertinent question that we talk about all this sculpture, all the symbolism, all the symbols that the deities carry, all the ayudh in their hands, all the bhang, the mudra, the hast that they carry, that they display. This is very symbolic in the sense that these symbols convey a lot of great and deep Hindu darshan. Was it possible for the common population to understand all of this? Or did our common population understand such deep darshan or philosophy, such elaborate terminology, darshan, philosophy conveyed by these beautiful symbols, varied and very sometimes complicated symbols? And that was a very pertinent question, because was it possible, especially in an era in which there were no contemporary schooling or greater academia in which all and everyone would be studying, was it possible for our civilization to convey the same meaning to everyone, so that at least a majority would understand what meaning was conveyed when they visited the temple, when they saw an icon, a vigraha, when they saw those various symbols, those hast, mudra, ayudh? When I thought and read for a long time about it, I found out that it was very true. Yes, we did understand all those symbols, even in the absence of contemporary schooling or colleges. But how is that? How does that happen? This understanding was made possible. First of all, we need to understand one feature about Hindu arts, that no matter what Hindu artistic discipline you are studying or you are working in, all Hindu arts, not just Hindu arts, but Hindu ethos, Hindu society, Hindu darshan has a common shared vocabulary. So the same term would be meaningful in, let's say, Hindu architecture, which term would be very meaningful in Hindu darshan too. For example, when a devotee goes to the temple, he does not go to pray, which is not to say that he doesn't pray or that's not a function to do that's not a thing to do in temple. But the primary goal, purpose of a Hindu visiting a temple is to have darshan of the deity of Bhagwan in the Garbhagriha, standing in mandapam and having darshan of Bhagwan. What is that darshan? It is imagined in most of the sects, not all, but most of the sects, that when you have darshan, when the archak invokes the deity inside the vigraha, there is a descent of consciousness from above, and that consciousness descends into the vigraha comes alive, becomes the deity. And in that moment, when you have darshan of, you are looking at an aspect of supreme consciousness. And because you yourself are considered an aspect of the same supreme consciousness, in one way you are also having a darshan of your own truest self when you are standing in a temple, when you are having darshan of the deity. You are not there yet, of course, but through this act, through having darshan again and again, you are encouraged and expected to move towards that path. So that is why it is called darshan. When you consider the discipline of Hindu philosophy, which is also called as darshan, now that's very different and very peculiar about Hindu philosophy, because the philosophy is not a good term to translate darshan, because darshan literally means that which you see, not what you imagine or invent with the agency of your mind, that which you see. That's why our sages, our rishis were seers. They saw the truth. They did not invent ideas, ideologies, or theologies. They saw the truth when they meditated, when they elevated their consciousness by doing sadhana under the guidance of a guru, when they reached higher states of consciousness, is that when they saw the truth, the ultimate truth, and that is called as darshan. That is why whatever they write is not born by the agency of an individual, by the flights of fancy of an individual mind, but instead it is what they see, the aspect either the ultimate truth itself or an aspect of that ultimate truth which they see while they meditate. That is why it is called darshan. It is not the fruit of a mind, an individual mind. It is the very truth, the ultimate truth, the cause of the entire universe, samsara, Brahman, which you can only witness while you do deep meditation under the guidance of a guru in a great tradition. That is why it is called darshan. Once you understand that term, darshan, by going to a temple, that same term is applied in high philosophy. And if you are approaching it from high philosophy, and when you go to a temple, you see the equivalence at both places, that it is essentially the same act. What is being discussed in high philosophy is what transpires when a devotee goes to a temple to have darshan of a deity. So this shared vocabulary is what made possible for a person, an individual studying or following a certain discipline, to have a blanket understanding of what Hindu ethos, what Hindu philosophy, what Hindu thinking was. And this was common throughout all disciplines. First of all, it also tells you a beautiful aspect about Hindu society and Sanatana Dharma, that we never created disciplines which could be studied in silos, which were divorced or separated from other disciplines. For example, if you contrast it with European art and architecture, especially in this particular case, Greek sculpture and architecture, it is entirely possible to study Greek architecture without having to do anything with Greek sculpture. And you can study Greek sculpture separately without having to study architecture. I'm not saying that there are no overlapping points, but it is generally possible to do that. In Hindu architecture and sculpture, it would be impossible because they are literally and technically flow into each other. If you go to Karnataka, if you see the Vesar tradition, a lot of their sculptural parts are actually, they play the part of architectural parts, but they are actually sculpted. So even the literal and technical boundary between architecture and sculpture is broken. They merge into one and the same. And this flow between two and many disciplines is very, very evident, that no Hindu discipline can be studied in silo. For example, when I started studying architecture, I realized that I could not understand it without studying Hindu sculpture. When I started studying Hindu sculpture, of course, I had to study Hindu iconography, because you could not just gather whatever the sculptures and the deities conveyed if you didn't study what were their hast, mudra, what did they convey. So I had to study Hindu iconography. Iconography, the greatest and the oldest text of iconography is, of course, the Natya Shastra, which is a text primarily about Natya. But it speaks upon all the mudras, all the hast and Karan. It gives a very great and very primary and exhaustive vocabulary to navigate through these symbols. So that is a text on which discusses primarily music and dance and drama. So then you have to study that too. When you do that, you realize that none of this is possible if you do not study Hindu darshan. So this is the seamlessness of Hindu disciplines, that no matter what disciplines you are following or studying or are involved in, you cannot fail to understand other disciplines also, and you will understand one discipline only when you understand other disciplines also. This is the most beautiful aspect of Hindu disciplines, that they cannot be studied in silos. They have to be studied in relation with other disciplines and in the light of the ultimate truth. For example, the myths and legends that the Hindus would listen or read in the Puranas, in the Agamas, were the same myths and legends which were portrayed in the temples. So all the stories that they had heard, they were depicted in the temples. These stories were told to convey certain philosophy, certain darshanic viewpoint, and that is what they would witness in the temples too. The mantra that they were used to invoke every day, all those mantra and the deities that were invoked in those mantra, all the aspects of the deities that were invoked in those mantras, they would be able to witness them in one or the other temple, in one or the other form. And all of the darshan, all of these stories, all of our gyan contained in the Vedas and all other scriptures, it was packaged and repackaged into so many forms that it reached every nook and corner of India. It would be bundled into stories. Stories would be smaller stories. Then there were roaming bards and mendicants who would convey the greatest of truths in the simplest of language in very short, in perhaps just one poem or just one short story which could be told in 4 or 5 minutes. And they would be traveling all the length and breadth across this great country of Bharatvarsh. And they would convey this meaning to each nook and corner of India without forcing everyone to go through, let's say, a modern academic system to tell these stories in the simplest, to tell the greatest of truths in the simplest of stories and to make them reach every nook and corner of Bharatvarsh. That was the greatest achievement of this civilization in this regard. Through Katha Pravachan Parampara, they made philosophy a common currency among common people. So at least they had an exposure to all of this. Some understood it, of course, some did not understand it. That is always so. It was not like there is no claim that everyone in India was a Gyani or a very learned person. That was, of course, not the scene. But they had an exposure to that great darshan, to that great discipline. So when they witnessed these vigrahas in temples and all Hindu arts, and because temple was the place where you could see most of Hindu art, so they had an instinctive understanding of what was being conveyed there. I would like to quote Kapila Vatsyayan in this, in which she says that for an Hindu artist, art was not a matter of individual creativity. Quote, the artist's preoccupation was with the symbol through which states of being could be suggested or recreated. Subjective personal experience played little or no part, and artistic creation began only when the artist had attained in his own intuitive mind the state of calm termed as equilibrium, Hridaya Vrishranti. Having conquered all personal suffering and pain and attained this state of complete detached emotion, he presented through age-old symbols the spectrum of life only to recreate a similar state of being in the reader or spectator, a state in which the latter could experience, however transitorily, the pure bliss, ananda, of art. So here she is saying what powers did a Hindu and Indian artist tap into. It was not individual art, which is now very popular in the West especially, where individual whims and fantasies of an artist, they take over. And it is through the peculiar offering of an individual artist that he is known. So the basic focus is how you can shock people into something new. And that is how what is now considered art is. It should be shocking, first of all, because it has to be new and very different. But that was not at all the case with the Hindu artist, with the Indian artist. Sri Kapila Vatsyayan once again says that how Indian architecture, sculpture and iconography represent the greatest of truths. Quote, just as Indian architecture reveals the unity through infinite multiplicity, Indian sculpture embodies the spirit and soul of the cosmic infinite in the form and body of the particular, the impersonal individual, which in turn suggests the cosmic and the infinite. But there is a deeper and greater source of the unity of this shared vocabulary. Because all art in India, like all philosophy, darshan, originated in the chit of a yogi while he was meditating, while he was in deep sessions of meditation. And that is when from these yogic chitta bhumis that all art and darshan of Hindu Dharma and Sanatan Dharma rose. This is the source of all that is creative in India, all that is uplifting, all that is beautiful, all that is meaningful. And that is why, because the source of all these different disciplines, art, philosophy, even mathematics, is the same chitta, yogic chitta bhumis, which are tapping into the ultimate truth, into the supreme consciousness, into our truest nature. And that is why the flow, the origin, is in the beej of all sansar, all creation, and the ultimate truth. And that is why there is a unity, not just perceived, but a very basic and fundamental unity in all Hindu arts and discipline, because they have understood this fact, the basic underlying unity of all, and they have managed to find ways to tap into this unity, to tap into these insights by going into meditation, deep into meditation. Art in dharmic culture rises in yogic chittbhumis. No external influence or individual innovation is necessary for the inspiration of art. The inspiration of dharmic art is always divine. The individual initiative is limited to the conviction of getting down to meditate. Art in such a society is born in the minds of the yogi. Even if all concrete signs of art are obliterated by enemies of dharma, they are not completely destroyed, for their origin lies in dhyan, in sadhana, in yogic chittbhumis. These yogic chittbhumis are available to not just the artist who sculpts a vigraha of Lord Vishnu, not only to the architect who designs the temple, but to any practitioner of yoga who is initiated into a meditational discipline by a great guru. The understanding of the artistic impulse was thus available to the common man too. This made for a shared plane of existence where symbolism was understood by a large number of individuals, including the devotees and not just the artists. Something which can be rediscovered by the artist can be rediscovered by the devotee too, and is regularly discovered in states of consciousness. The shared vocabulary that pervaded various disciplines of art also pervaded darshan or Hindu sciences too, and most importantly, they all had their origin in the yogic chittbhumis, in the yogic states of consciousness, which were available to the common man, to the non-artists too. Not everyone meditated, let's be clear about that, or struck upon states of consciousness conducive to great art, but sufficient individuals in the society did, and their experiences had a ready-made vocabulary and social customs and rituals to make them popular across all sections of society. That is the beauty of Hindu arts. This is the reason that the Hindu devotee could understand the meaning of the vigrahas that he saw, the Devalaya that he visited, and the painting that he saw. All Indian arts, all Hindu arts, shared a vocabulary with common metaphors. All Indian disciplines originated in yogic chittbhumis, which were accessible to anyone who meditated. That is what created the connection between the artist and the devotee. Thank you.